So good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Employment Matters Committee, and welcome to both established members of the committee and new members of the committee. So tonight we'll start with apologies for absence. Have we received any apologies?
There's no apologies, Chair.
Thank you. And next we'll move on to record of the meeting held on 24th of January 2023. Do we have any questions or any concerns? Are they an accurate reflection of the meeting for those who were there? The one that was there. Okay, so do we approve the record of the meeting held on 24th of January 2023? Thank you, members. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 3, urgent matters. I have been informed there are none.
No.
Thank you. And let's move on to agenda item 4, declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests and other significant interests. Councillor Hackwell.
Just to say that my wife is a part-time tutor and assessor for midway adult education, and I declare that, and I have done for the last 5 years, so nothing's changed.
Thank you, Councillor Hackwell. Any other declarations of interest? Councillor Cook.
I'm a member of the NAHT. I can't imagine it will mix, but it's worth saying that I'm in a union.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. Councillor Field.
I'm a member and a trade union representative and branch chair for TSSA in Transport for London. I don't imagine that would be an issue, but...
Thank you, Councillor Field. And I would like to declare that I am a member of Unite the Union. Okay. Any other interests? No? Okay. We'll move on to agenda item 5, MedPay review update. And for this, I would like to ask Nikki Smith to introduce the report. Nikki, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. For those of you who don't know me, I am working as a project manager, running the MedPay review now, working with Nicola Traynor, my line manager, and Sam as project director as well. This paper is to give an update on the MedPay review. It commenced in October last year. It had actually been long due to review MedPay. MedPay are our terms and conditions, and they'd been introduced in 2013. So there had been a promise to undertake a review that full council committed to back in January 2020. However, then due to COVID, that was postponed. So this committee, back on August the 31st, 2022, decided to take a different approach in terms of piloting a new model. And at that meeting, it was proposed to move to an enhanced MedPay approach, which would address issues such as retaining a talented workforce, attracting and recruiting a skilled workforce, supporting career progression, addressing the challenge of staff leaving and skills shortages, and ensuring there is a transparent and consistent approach to applying policy for market enhancements and retention payments based on regular market condition assessments. So the review aims to achieve greater pay consistency across Medway Council and provide clear routes for career progression and career pathways to enable staff to develop and move through the pay band. The review has also sought to establish a consistent set of data tools to inform departmental pay strategies, and 2 mechanisms are now in place to enable us to do that. We have procured a job evaluation system and salary benchmarking system, which I will talk about in a little bit more detail later on. In some areas of the council, there's been a high reliance on locums, and we are hoping that the intended enhancements will attract permanent staff into the council and reduce this reliance and therefore reduce costs on locums. So we've been undertaking a pilot. We've targeted approximately 10% of the organisation for phase 1. However, in phase 1, that 10% has actually grown to around 13% of the organisation now, because there have been a whole team approach in some of the areas that we've initially targeted. For example, one of our leading edge on the pilot is STG. South Thames Gateway Building Control Partnership, and we decided to do the whole of the service, whereas initially we only were going to look at the building control aspects. So that's been very helpful, and we're hoping by the 1st of August we will have had 13% of the organisation will have been through the review so that we can learn from the pilot. This committee requested a report on the pilot, but it's not yet finished, but we felt that as it's been 6 months in infancy, it would be a good time to give a progress report. Our analysis on this has really shown that the areas that we've selected have had serious recruitment and retention issues and were well chosen for this. It was our corporate management team that decided on who would be in the first phase, and we took into account turnover rates, recruitment difficulties, retention factors, market conditions, and managers' capacity to be able to engage in this pilot to enable them to develop the career progression frameworks. And in the paper you will see in section 3 all the teams and the roles that have been involved in phase 1. There are 3 main aspects of this review: the career progression frameworks and career pathways, job evaluation where job profiles have changed by 30% or more, assessment of market conditions through salary benchmarking. The career progression frameworks aim to bring onto a clear table identification of the core skills required in the role and ability to progress through the role through an ABC mechanism, which you can see in the appendix, where the South Thames Gateway Partnership has provided their career progression framework for you to look through to get a better understanding of what that looks like. And the areas that we're looking at is A, developing, B, practice, which would be around midpoint of the salary range, and C, accomplished, where people would be able to progress to the top of the salary pay band. We have procured a new system for NJC. We have been using the National Joint Council scheme for many years. We haven't replaced that scheme. We've actually enhanced it with an automated system that is recommended by the Local Government Association called PILAT, Gauge Plus Software. And we have just been trained on that within HR and on the 25th of May, and we will be rolling that out over the next few months. We have been able to upload all of our data into that system, so all the benchmarking work that we've done, all the job evaluation work that we've done previously had been saved into spreadsheets and databases, and we were able to put all that data into the system, which gets us off to a good start in terms of being able to do pay profiling and modelling in the future, as well as ensuring a consistent and fair approach when we undertake our job evaluations. So I've already mentioned about South Thames Gateway Partnership. They've been very helpful with us as leading on many of this, in that we have been testing standard templates with them, and they've actually been rolling those out to the rest of the pilot, and we've been adapting those as we move along, and we do envisage more testing going through the rest of the phase, and we will have toolkits available that will be downloadable for when we introduce phase 2. Any costs associated with the review, for example, an introduction of market allowance for skills shortages and retention purposes, would have to be agreed under delegated authorisations by corporate management teams and the corporate management team subset that considers updates on the review on a fortnightly basis. The review is committed to ensuring that there will be no one put at detriment, that if there is somebody who requires salary protection because the evaluation that's made against the career progression framework shows that they're actually skilled at a lower level than they're being paid, and that may very well be the case in some instances, then their pay will be protected and support will be put in place to assist them in attaining the level that they need to be for that particular pay range. In terms of risk management, it's an integral part of good governance and project governance processes. And I'm pleased to say that we've actually got to the risk register now, the corporate risk register, which is going to Cabinet on the 13th of June. And our risk register has been incorporated in there with some minor changes. The copy of the risk register can be found at Appendix 2, and as I say, you can also see the Cabinet report where the aspect of risks around the project are detailed. As the review is concentrated on enhancements to the current MedPay scheme, there hasn't been a need to formally consult on the changes. However, we do ensure that we are engaging the trade unions through our normal mechanisms, such as our Corporate Consultative Committee and JCC, and we have regular informal communication channels in place as well, so that any concerns or issues that may be raised can be addressed informally as well. Our communications and engagement strategy is attached to Appendix 3, and our plan in terms of delivery model is Appendix 4. We are ensuring that all key stakeholders and staff in the Council are kept informed of the proposed changes and invited to comment at all stages. We've also had a case where each directorate has nominated communication champions specifically for the MedPay review, so that allows two-way communication channel for directors to feedback any issues or concerns anonymously if so wished, so that the project team can then consider them. Once we've completed the pilot, we will be doing a full financial evaluation to ensure that that data is available. At present, we've had 4 teams who've been costed out with out of the 10% that have been approved by corporate management team, and the increase of cost to the council is 118,000 at this time, and it is anticipated that that will be met within existing budgets to fund the impact. So the next steps, we will be rolling out to phase 2, but there has been a need to refine some of our policies because our standard policies are there for people on the current MedPay, but we need to be using new policies, and you will see further on the agenda that there are some policy recommendations there where we're adapting those policies to meet the needs of the MedPay review. In phase 2, we are hoping for the majority of the rest of the organisation, with just a number of roles being left to phase 3, and we have secured some resource to have some fixed-term posts in place, which we are currently recruiting to at the moment, fixed term for 1 year. In phase 3, as well as picking up on the few roles that will be left to pick up on, such as service manager roles and strategic service manager roles, for example, we will be mapping transferable skills to enable cross-organisational career pathways. At present, it's very difficult for individuals to see beyond the teams and the silos that they may be currently working, and with our job evaluation database, we're actually identifying and mapping the transferable skills that could, factors that could actually open doors for individuals to move across the council, and that will be visible and transparent to them. I'm recommended in this paper that members are asked to note the report, and I will obviously bring a further paper back once the pilot phase is fully evaluated.
Thank you, Nikki. I open up to comments and questions from the committee members. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. Very good idea, and like progression, very good. Well, one of the things you just touched on was the service managers and strategic service manager roles. Now, with STG, the planning, it's all sort of the same thing. You know, it's to do with building planning and things like that. When you've got service managers in frontline services, where they train and they get up to a certain level and then they apply for a job in a different part of the council, they get very disappointed. They've got the grade and they say, well, we got the experience, but they haven't got the knowledge. This is where it causes a problem. But so it'd be interesting to see when you look at that section of it, how you get on with that bit.
Thank you, Councillor Filmer. I believe that we will look at leadership competency frameworks when it comes to those levels of management, and look at more generic skills in terms of identifying abilities there. Sam may correct me on that, but I think that will be where we'll be heading when we move to that phase.
Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the 118,000, we've only looked at probably 4 teams out of 16 in the pilot 10, and we've already got 118,000 there. If you just rolled that out, that would be up £3 million or something we would have to be looking for over how over the council, which is an awful lot of money, just same people doing the same jobs, but we're just paying them £3 million more. So how are we going to manage that? I mean, you know, it's all right saying it's going to be within the existing budget, but the only way to do that in the existing budget is to not fill vacancies or get rid of people.
Thank you, Councillor Hackwell. Just on the first instance, there are some teams where it won't cost anything because the assessments that are being done and the benchmarking that's been done in the marketplace are actually showing that there isn't a need to introduce market supplements or market allowances. So there will be some that do not. In terms of the wider budget issues, I think I'll defer to Sam, who may want to comment on that because obviously she's on the CMT subset where they discuss those issues.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I guess when we went about this review, one of the reasons we wanted to do the 10% in terms of those that have got the highest recruitment and retention issue problems, if you like, is where we've got the highest cost at the moment in terms of backfilling with locums. So we've already got a pressure within our establishment and budget. So whilst we're not necessarily making savings, we're reducing the overall pressure in terms of what we're paying out on the workforce. So I think that was one of the first things. And there's a recycled spend there. So, you know, nobody on corporate management team went into this review thinking that it wouldn't cost us to correct the historical pay that we've had. I think that's fair to say. Part of our planning around our medium-term financial outlook is to make assumptions around what the workforce might need in order to make sure the budget build is correct. And one of the assumptions we've made is within a structured workforce, you would look at 20% being your entry level, 60% being in the middle who are doing a good job, and then your kind of extra 20% being your succession. And that would be an ideal model with any workforce design. Now, to get to that model, we know that we're probably going to have people in different places depending on how long they've been here. So we do expect a spike in the cost of this, but that then to patter down into the 20-60-20. What we've done to compensate some of the forecasting around this, we've made some assumptions around midpoint of the current salaries. Now, there's no massive scientific fact behind this, but what that does create is with a £2 million pressure. So we've been very transparent around the pressure, what that might mean and how we might fund that, and corporate management team as a subset are looking at what that might mean across all of our functions. Now, we've also got a transformation journey that we're embarking on, so you might be familiar with our DDAT strategy, digital data and technology strategy, and the MedPay 2.0. Within that, there will be automation that will mean we will probably pay people, we expect to pay people better, but have less people doing that role. That doesn't necessarily mean redundancies because we've got a lot of vacancies within the system that we haven't backfilled against. So it's creative accounting to that regard in terms of how we make that affordable, but we're not looking at this being job losses because of the amount of vacancies that we're currently carrying. There is an assumption that this first 10% will cost the most because that has been where we've got the highest recruitment and retention need. If we've got a static workforce and we're paying well within that workforce, which we have done, so although the policy says we can't move people through those pay bands, we have had to respond to market conditions. For example, social workers. We've already had to respond to put a market premium on there. And as the years have gone on, we've established that budget in the base budget to make that build. So Nick is absolutely right. In some instances, we'll be putting in career progression and not necessarily raising pay. And I think it's been really clear from the offset of this project that this isn't about a pay increase. It's about how we reward, motivate and retain staff, which is slightly different. But ultimately, we're going to see a peak, most definitely in cost, as we transfer from that locum need into our baseline. But if we're in a situation where our workforce design is 20-60-20, what we predict it to be, then we will need to make that affordable within our budget assumptions. So there is further work going on around what phase 2 might look like, but this is based on assumptions on what we now know from the pilot phase. But we are aware and knew it would cost, and that would have to be a detriment to not delivering something or doing things differently.
Just the 2 million you mentioned, is that in addition to the 2 million for the Band 8 and £500 gap, or is that the two that's in the other paper?
It's all incorporated within the cost envelope.
In the other paper.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, even in terms of some of the systems that we've had to bring in, we've had to look at priority. So, you know, we've gone to market to procure the benchmarking system. So we've had to look at the priority of how we do that. And the fact remains, if we don't respond to the workforce and the need to increase the salaries of what we pay staff to retain them and make them feel rewarded, we won't have staff delivering the services we need. So we've got to make some hard choices, but we're not coming at this assuming we're making redundancies to make this affordable. And that's why we've done the pilot, because when we've done the pay approach previously, there was a bit of distrust within the organisation that we'd force people to sign new contracts. We're absolutely not doing this. We're doing it in a collaborative, very transparent way to make sure the organisation is coming along with us so that they can see what's happening. Now, I know that this will not be without people feeling that they're not getting what they want from this. You know, when you say pay review, people assume there's going to be a pay rise, particularly with what we've had year upon year. And one of the commitments of getting the Medway champions in is for us to understand what the mood music is within the organisation and respond accordingly. And I think that's really important. So, you know, this has got a lot of support and people are behind it, but it will not result in pay lifts for everybody. And I think, you know, that is not going to land too well with people. And we have quite a comprehensive risk register. And one of the things on the risk register is people will not like this and they will leave because they don't like the change. And we've got to be mindful that actually from a retention point, it might not immediately do what we need it to do because we might lose people. I think our risk register is probably as long as our project plan around what we're doing and how we're doing it. But that is under constant review from corporate management team.
I did
Councillor Hackwell?
question on a technical basis. I looked at the building control on Appendix 1 and the matrix of how you get moved to different jobs, and it wasn't plainly obvious for me how a trainee assistant building control surveyor may get to a level C, but they've only got an ONC and been 2 years training. And when you jump to the next job, which was assistant building control surveyor, which one would assume the trainee's been training for, the entry level says you've got to have an HNC. So I didn't see an immediate tie-in between those two jobs. So if I was a trainee and I got to the end of my level, I can't see that I meet the qualifications to entry the next level. So how are we going to incorporate that sort of tying?
Nikki, do you want to respond?
In addition to, I didn't want to flood you with documents, to be honest with you, but there are, in the documentation around individuals' career progression, there is an ability to map and actually work with individuals about how they're going to achieve moving to the next level. That will be accompanied by the performance appraisal process as well, which is covered in a separate item 2 today. So the beauty of this is it's transparent and people can discuss if there's anything that's not clear to them. And that happens within the service. That's been happening already with people testing out these. If something doesn't look easy, the dust will settle and we will adapt it. This isn't written in stone either. They've got to be tested in practice. So over the coming year, even the pilots may find that their documentation differs slightly in order to make it clearer where those career pathways and how those career pathways can progress.
Would it be not sensible to put on the, I don't know, on the assistant building control that one of the entry levels is to be a level C in the trainee or something like that? Which
and what will happen,
follow that pathway through in the rest of the documents.
And there was a mention about budgets earlier, and what will happen is during the recruitment processes as well, looking at the 20-60-20 span of how this will work in practice in terms of to be affordable, there will be direct targeting at certain levels, so we may be targeting at the bottom of the level in order to then, for people to then move forward, so that we've got much more succession planning in the future as well as affordability. So that's a help. So you have your experts there. But I agree, that's good. Yeah, take that back.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you. I just want to come back to the question about sort of initial feedback from staff that you were just explaining about Medway Champions. Do you have some kind of, so obviously in the comm strategy and it's covered really extensively, as you say, in the risk register, do you have, can you expand a little bit more on kind of what initial feedback's been on this first phase of the pilot? I was really taken by your awareness that this was coming over Christmas. And do you have some kind of benchmarks in terms of satisfaction rates? You know, how are you monitoring and measuring the impact on kind of ensuring it's not defeating the object, if you like?
We've identified at the moment about 15 different KPIs that we're going to be evaluating, and you'll find a lot more about that once we've actually got those in place. Within those KPIs, we are looking at elements such as exit surveys, the staff survey, because they are done regularly. So it gives us a constant to look against, and that's where a lot of the satisfaction information comes from now. But because we are engaging so actively in every meeting that we can possibly attend, where we're welcomed and challenged, we're getting that direct to ourselves too. So there's the informal channels too, and we're mapping all of that together. Obviously, there'll be other things that will be in the evaluation, which are the statistics around turnover and vacancies, etc. too, as well. But the satisfaction elements, we've got 3 avenues there that we're looking at.
Councillor Cook.
Battery issue. I'll raise my voice and hopefully it will pick up. So those KPIs will be shared with this committee when they're prepared, and it will be interesting to have those as soon as they're ready, really, because obviously it would be good to sort of watch how that progresses over time. Have you got a kind of timescale as to when they might be?
Yeah, and we're actually helping one of the universities in Kent, and we're taking an employability student for a couple of weeks to work with us as well, who's got statistical data analysis skills too, so that we can have some external perspective on that. So we've got a master's degree graduate that's coming to work with us too on that too, so that there's some robust challenge as we get them fit. I mean, I'm happy to share a list of what they look like now. I really, if the committee wanted a little short briefing which just says these are some of the things we're looking at, I'm more than happy to share half a side of A4 just to let you know the sorts of things we look at.
Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair. I've got another question which is in the policy itself. It says that, MedPay is not really applicable to casual staff. And we've learned tonight via training that we have 17% of our staff are on a casual contract. How are those 17% of staff getting their cost of living allowances and performance related bonuses and all the rest of it if they're not in MedPay?
So they will be subject to the cost of living award, so they will receive that. In terms of if they are in role for more than 3 months, that's when the current scheme suggests that's when objectives, etc., can be applied to them and they can be assessed against the MedPay criteria. What that means for casual staff in this new policy is a work in progress, if I'm perfectly honest. We haven't 100% decided what that should be. There are no casual staff within our pilot scheme, so in terms of priority, that's a bit further down the list, but we'll start to work on that as we're moving into phase 2, where casual staff will be impacted. That's the honest answer. This is a pilot. We didn't have everything agreed up front. We are learning and iterating and reviewing and researching as we go through.
But it doesn't specifically exclude casual staff. It's not subject to MedPay. So it's like the 20% that aren't.
At this moment in time, the revised draft policy does not apply to casual staff. That may change.
Do we have any additional comments, questions? So we have been asked as members, we've been asked to note the report. Are we happy to note the report? Agreed? Okay. That has been agreed. Thank you so much, Nikki. And moving on to agenda item 6, revised MedPay policy. And I'm going to ask Nicola to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is bringing forward a draft revised MedPay policy. So the existing policy will continue to be applied to the majority of the organisation, and this revised policy is to apply to our pilot group and any further teams that are on board over the next phase 2. And it's still a draft policy at this stage because there are likely to be further changes, iterations that are made to this policy as we continue to learn from the pilot group. But we did need to have a policy for our pilot group to have reference to in terms of how the MedPay scheme, revised MedPay scheme, would apply to them. So, importantly, some changes and enhancements are that there will no longer be an assessed PDR score linked to their performance-related pay. So they will not have a 1A, 1B, 2 or 3 award. There will be a performance appraisal and there will be a assessment made, but that won't directly link to pay. Currently, there's also the wider contribution element to MedPay, and this will not apply in the revised policy. What they will have, though, is the career progression frameworks where their competency can be assessed and they can move through their pay range. The changes proposed at 3.2 are as follows. A new performance appraisal process incorporating discussion on wellbeing, career conversation and new assessment levels as existing levels 1A, 1B, 2 and 3 are no longer applicable. We felt it was really important that as we developed these career progression frameworks, that it was explicit that career conversations should be taking place with staff, and that as we mature in this new approach, we develop talent management and succession planning routes for staff. As I said, there'll be no assessment or reward for wider contribution. The career progression frameworks for all roles and process for submitting evidence to progress through the pay range from A to B to C, which are fixed spot points within the pay range, and clarity on the cost of living award, known as COLA. So as I've advised, this is not a final draft of the policy. Therefore, it has not been formally consulted upon with trade unions and employee forums at this stage, but informal updates have been provided to the trade unions, and staff are receiving regular communications about the review, not least through the MedPay communications champions. This final draft policy will be shared for comments with all relevant stakeholders and then be brought back to this committee for agreement. So it's intended that this draft policy will provide a reference document for those moving to the enhanced MedPay scheme and will be supported by a suite of tools and guidance documents, again, which will develop and grow, I'm sure, as we progress through the pilot. So we're asking this committee to note this draft working policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. And I will ask our members if we have comments and questions. Councillor Filmer.
Yeah, thank you. So this will come back to this committee when it's been to the corporate management team, because until it goes there to see if this is viable, we can't really give a steer, can we?
Nicola?
So the usual process for consultation on HR policies is that we consult with the trade unions and our staff forums, so for example our Disabled Workers and Carers Network. It's not usual that our policies go up the corporate management team line, but as part of this MedPay review, corporate management team are fully cited on all of the policies, tools, guidance that we're producing for the MedPay review.
Councillor Cook.
There we are. Right, press it twice. I just wanted to check the kind of, again, it's a risk question, that if we're replacing something that's about wider impact and making our conversations focused purely on someone's current work and their future hopes, are we at risk of losing people's commitment to the whole and to work that people might want to do which would benefit sections of the organisation outside of their own area of work? So does this run a risk of silo working, and how are we kind of avoiding that?
Great question. Thank you, Councillor Cook. I would go back to what Sam discussed earlier in terms of 1As were the ones that you had to demonstrate wider contribution to get a 1A. The number of staff that actually receive a 1A is a very, very small percentage of the current workforce. So in removing that, I can't see the risk. And I think the motivation from the workforce, they're choosing to work for a local authority. They want to make a difference, not only just in their direct role, but across the whole council and for the community that we serve.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you. Yeah, I can really see that and really appreciate that. And I was interested in just tying that together with the work you were suggesting about things like the EDI networks and the different areas that people might have that option of being involved across the whole. And how that, you know, again, as you're looking at rolling this out in wider areas of the business, what those
Sam, do you want to respond?
Yeah, there's a couple of points there really. So one of the things we're quite clear that we need to fix is the fact that we've got quite a diverse organisation in terms of the professions that we're working with. And one of the barriers we've got at the moment is we apply the same approach to everybody, whether you're in HR or you're in planning or legal team. And that doesn't work in that regard. So the career progression frameworks are really key to the profession, and it's going to be a lot easier to introduce that where that is a professional element and it has a body that's already governed by it. But we also have a lot of generalist roles, and we've got to look at those transferable skills across those generalist roles. So part of phase 3, so phase 2 will onboard most of the organisation, but part of phase 3 we'll be looking at how, if you're coming into the organisation, you could be sitting, for example, in HR as an entry-level job and you think, this isn't for me. Now, we don't want to lose them from Medway, so how do we expand them, what the other career pathways might be, and what transferable skills can they take with them to those other areas? I think in terms of then the progression at the senior layer, most definitely the senior leaders will be in phase 3 as well, because we've kind of got to get the bulk in the middle done properly and done right. And you would expect that stretch and that overarching umbrella view across those areas to be much greater the higher you're coming up through the organisation, particularly where we have a lot of collaborative projects. So, for example, a couple that spring to mind at the moment, we're looking at housing options for our care leavers. That takes into account a number of different teams across the organisation. So to have an appreciation of who's doing what role, how people operate and how we do that, we're looking for consistency of approach, but how we measure and how we then manage what they're doing daily would be different. So that is in our thinking, but I think we've got to form these professional frameworks first in order then to join that synergy across the piece. In terms of the 10% that's going through at the moment and the engagement we've done, we have a separate service manager session, which so we have volunteers from all different areas across the council who come together to get involved in some of the decisions we're making and give it an overview if they're involved in the project or not. So we're making sure that we're tapping into, if we do it over here, would it work over there? What would that look like and how would that read across? And that's been really critical to ensuring that there's senior leadership buy-in to our approach before we get it too far wedded into what we're doing. But the transferable skills bit is the bit that we've got to be really transparent on. We currently have a set of competencies that are common across all areas. And what that means in essence really is we're duplicating work. So if I take children's again as an example, we've got our Medway common competencies and then you've got the professional standards of which they need to adhere to. So there's a lot of energy and work going into ticking both boxes, and that's what we want to avoid here. So it's that common ground that we're looking for. But the reality of that is that's going to be in phase 3 once we've mapped it all out. And that's an exciting task, but quite a big task, if I'm being honest, but absolutely within the thinking.
Councillor Field?
Hi. Thanks for this very thorough report. What I was wondering was, in terms of the role of training and mentoring and support that's given. I mean, for instance, if we look at the South Thames Gateway Planning Control, we see that there's formal qualifications between steps up. So I just wanted to check what abilities there were for people to access training in work. And secondly, as well as formal academic qualifications, what access is there and what work has there been to kind of the more soft skills, so the coaching, the mentoring, that type of thing that can really help people get through, you know, what's kind of a tiered process and actually can be the biggest barrier to making sure that people with different protected characteristics can progress through an organisation that has hierarchies like a council, for instance.
Our main route to training at the moment is apprenticeships at all levels. So we absolutely maximise the apprenticeship levy. We make sure that we offer that at all levels right through to management. That complements a number of our areas across the council, and we're quite proud of our apprenticeship academy that we have and the usage that it gets with existing staff as well as new staff that are coming in as apprenticeships. It's a way to make sure that our budget goes further in that regard, and you know, not all of those are necessarily qualifications at the end. Some of those are intros into leadership and so forth. So that actually is our main route. We have a small training budget. It's divided by areas of need in terms of the council. If legislation's changing, for example, how we're going to fund people being trained with that qualification to move forward. And that it really is flexible across the council depending on what the need is and the entry levels in which we're bringing people in. An aspiration for the new pay model is where we're going to have, if you like, the top of the band. So this is the people that are doing the over and above bit. There will be an element of expectation around mentoring back to the individuals that are coming in new to that profession and that area, because the over and above bit will be being beyond you doing a good job. It's you giving something back to the organisation. In terms of leadership, we're in a pilot phase at the moment for a leadership programme. So we have a leadership academy. We're looking at this being an introduction into leadership, but we're going to mandate it for all existing leaders across Medway. So we've got a consistency of approach in there. And again, part of that leadership is looking at what it means to be a new leader in Medway, a leader that's well established, but then also an experienced leader who's giving something back. And that forms a formal mentoringship programme that we will do internally. Across the county, we work with other organisations. So the one thing we don't do well enough is that cross-working or secondments. So we have secondments internally often, but we don't often have it across the organisation. And a commitment from the financial group as well as the HR group is that rather than lose people out of public sector, we will work smarter and better together to make sure we're sharing that talent. Now, that is going to be really difficult to achieve. I have no doubt about it. But I think we need to look beyond Medway in terms of retaining skills within public sector. So there's a number of things in flight. There isn't a luxury of a huge budget, so we're using what we've got to our disposal within that. I guess in terms of some of the softer skills, we have a in-house trainer who we pay as part of our workforce, and they design and do a lot of in-house training around the softer skills depending on what the need is within the organisation. There is an opportunity for managers to come forward to ask for a particular course to be designed and commissioned to the way that we need it to do. Now, the trained trainer will also tap into the expertise across the organisation and make sure that they're coming on and doing things like video learning or lunch and learn sessions. So we're not looking at taking people out for days at a time and putting them on training programs, but we have a much softer, linear approach to that kind of softer skills element that people might need. And some of those might be having difficult conversations, it might be effective time management. There's a whole host of catalogue of training that we would offer from the soft skills part.
Councillor Field?
So do we have a training library that's aligned to some of the competencies? Because that seems like we may not have as that comprehensive.
We have a very comprehensive library of training. The difficulty we have at the moment is you could look in there and choose a number of courses and not necessarily know what's going to benefit you in your role. So part of the design around the career progressional frameways is to recommend training that will complement that development for your profession. And again, if I use the leadership one, whilst we're doing senior leaders at the end of the MedPay review, we're focusing on bringing the skills up for leaders. Now, as a new leader into Medway, you could walk into, view online our learning library, and I might decide that I want to do some nudge theory, but actually I probably shouldn't be doing my nudge theory until I can have a constructive conversation with my staff. So we will be recommending what learning is available at what level for individuals across that learning. Now, some of that is e-learning, some of it is classroom-based, some of it is virtual learning, and some of it is video-based. So it's a suite of activity that's available to everybody across the council, but we need to nudge people into the right way to complement the new career paths that we're putting in place. Some of that learning is yet to be designed, because until we've got those levels in, we don't know if we've covered it as an area of need. But for a qualification point, if we're putting it in the career pathway, it is down to us to assure that we have that qualification available, but most definitely and often it's through the apprenticeships.
Do we have any more comments or questions? No. So we've been asked as members to note the draft working policy. Are we in agreement? Agreed. Agreed. Thank you. And moving on to agenda item 7, the skills shortage and retention allowance policy. And I'm going to ask Sam Beck-Farley to introduce this report. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. So this, very similar to the MedPay policy, is a new policy that won't necessarily apply to the whole of the organisation at this time. So it's a policy that we want to bring in immediately and get this moving so that we can work quite quickly with the 10% that are managing to come on. Now, this is not a brand new policy in the sense that we already have an existing policy called the market premium. The difficulties we have with the market premium is it's something that has been used to supplement salary as opposed to having a regular review against market conditions. That is largely down to the fact that we've only ever benchmarked internally and not necessarily externally, of which we now have a system that can confirm our thinking in that regard. And also, where we haven't had significant movement within the bands, there is an expectation with existing market premiums that they form part of that salary package, rather than there ever being an attempt to remove one. So this policy sets to do two things. It sets to look at skills shortages in the market, as well as retention payments. Now, for retention currently, what we tend to find happens around retention is if somebody becomes a flight risk and they're an integral part of that team, people will look to increase their salary permanently within the band. With the new pay approach with the 3 points, that's not something people are going to have the flexibility to do. So it's really important that if we do have a significant flight risk that is a single point of failure and we can't afford to lose them from the business, we can work on a retention allowance that will retain them for that period of time and create that flexibility within the current scheme. The skills shortage is slightly different. So the skills shortages is based on the market conditions and what's going on around us. And I mentioned social workers earlier. We know that's a national skills shortage in the market. It applies to everybody. So last year we looked to put in place a £3,000 market premium, which really would have been a skills shortage allowance. The difference with these is we're looking at short-term and long-term. So where they've been in place for a period of time under current policy, with the new policy, we'll be looking at a short-term measure being 12 months with a full review, and the long-term measure being deemed at 24 months with a full review. Under 4.2 within the paper, you can find the criteria of application. So there is a business case that needs to be presented for any of these, and they are largely dependent on a lot of evidence from around the market, failed recruitment campaigns, and what others are doing around us, and whether or not we've had difficulty recruiting. They will be subject to review, and there's quite a robust governance process in place. And a key part of this really is to help us inform where we might need to make salary adjustments in the future. One of the things we haven't done previously around the current pay approach is ever really look to permanently change salaries. So if there is an element where we do need that allowance and it does need to be in longer, we will have the evidence and the background to suggest that our pay does need to change considerably. At the moment, we don't have that. So this paper goes some way to ensuring flexibility within the new pay approach, but tackling it from two different parts, which is retention as well as skill shortages, as opposed to the current market premium that seems to be applied to a number of different things. So it's very difficult to track, review or remove. The retention payment, just for information, it is in the paper, but the retention payment has a cap limit on it of £3,000 and the skills shortages has a cap of £5,000. The key thing to mention here is this is a pilot policy. We don't know if that will work. And I think until we start using this and applying it, we won't have the evidence to suggest whether those caps are reasonable. We've got to put a cap on it to make sure it's controllable. We've got to put a cap on it to make sure what we're doing within the current MedPay approach is applicable to market and that our benchmarking system that we've got is doing what it needs to do, rather than having somebody down the road who might have a grant that's out at the moment and they might be paying over and above just for that one position. So there will be a lot of evaluation and testing going into this new skills and retention allowance, but having those review points will really give us the understanding if this is the best approach for us. So committee are asked to review the new policy in light of the old policy to see the changes that we're presenting, understand the difference with the short-term, long-term, the capped limits, as well as being satisfied with the governance, the business case and the review mechanism that we're looking to put in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Do we have comments and questions? Councillor Filmer, over
No,
to
it's
you.
more of a comment, really. I'm quite happy to agree principle on this, because in this day and age you need flexibility in all businesses, and we all know the skills shortage can be totally different types of people at different years, so that needs to be flexible. And the retention, as I spoke about earlier at the briefing, if we had this in place, we could have kept some good staff on board, perhaps not gone to a London Borough or KCC. So no, it's the way you got to do it.
Councillor Hackwell.
Yeah, just a technical question, really, and understanding why it's in the policy. You've written in the policy there's the special conditions, and one of them is no submitted resignation before you apply the policy. So I read that, and maybe you could expand it. Is not submitted resignation prior to the payment being made. So what does that actually mean? Because I would have thought that could be a trigger mechanism if someone says, look, I'm leaving to go to Lewisham or whatever and I want to resign, and you have the conversation and it turns out because they believe they're getting better paid in Lewisham or wherever. So I don't quite understand what that means. Maybe I'm misreading it, but I would have thought if they handed their resignation in, but we want to retain them, why is that in there as a statement?
Sam, are you happy to respond?
Thanks, Chair. I guess that's been put in as a point of caution, in all fairness, to the current way of operating. So what we find ourselves in a situation at the moment is somebody will say, I'm going to resign because down the road there's a job that pays more, and we will just respond to that. We won't market test it. We won't look at whether that's fair, that's right. And that leads to inconsistencies in our current workforce and unfairness of pay and potentially equal pay claims. So we want to be in a position whereby we are acting, I guess, proactively moving with these policies and using these in the way we need to. So, if I take an example at the moment, I know that within my own team, one of my own teams, I have a retention issue brewing. I don't want to wait to the point where someone's going to resign for me to respond to that. So I would now be able to access this policy with the business case and make people feel valued ahead of them resigning. Normally, what we found within HR, and you might know this within your own organisations, but if you allow people to get to the point where they've told you pay's not right, they've told you something's happening somewhere else, and you haven't reacted to that, and you're at a point where they actually resign, you've probably been too late in valuing that member of staff. So I think it's in there for that particular point.
I understand, but if they do resign, then you've lost them anyway. I mean, it's almost like tying your hands up. That doesn't give you the flexibility to respond if necessary. That's my concern. Yeah, I understand the principle that you want it to be proactive, but if it's necessary and reactive, you've already tied your hands up and said, well, I can't because you've resigned.
So I think there's got to be, as part of this new pay approach and the workforce design I've spoke around the 20-60 and 20%, there will inevitably be people that leave this organisation. We are probably culturally trying to hang on to people that probably do need to move on for their career, actually, because we don't have those openings for them, and they should be branching out and doing other stuff. And I think culturally we've got to get in a position where we don't panic and think we can't backfill that. And it's about having that succession coming through and that talent coming through, and it is okay to lose people. So it's creating the balance. But I take your point, but I think for managers, there's quite a big ask of us in HR and senior leaders to get this right and to change that mindset. And even when we go to recruit at market now, you know, if we're looking, you know, it's common practice when you go to an interview panel, you take the best person off the panel and you ask what salary they want and you try and match it. We will now be looking at the design of the workforce, thinking, do we want an entry-level job? Do we want somebody who can come in and do the job? Or are we looking for someone with super experience? And again, thinking about how we're writing those job descriptions, how we're doing those interviews, and being very clear with people around expectations is going to be a mind change. So I think what we're trying to do is cover it off to say, don't wait until someone's resigned. Be on your workforce, understand your workforce, understand your profession, and act proactively around that, rather than have that as a fallback to say, oh, and then we'll just scramble you back because you've already made a decision to go. We've got to get better and more proactive at it. But I mean, we can absolutely take that on board and test that to see if that has a negative impact against the policy, to see if that is where we get to, where we're not reacting quick enough. You know, particularly whilst we're rolling out the rest of the project, the capacity in HR is quite restricted because a lot of it is into the project. So we've got to be mindful how we make sure we're watching what's going on around us regionally, nationally, and what's going on within those markets.
I actually have a question as well, Sam, which is, obviously this is a new policy that you're asking us to agree. How are you intending to socialise the new policy across the organisation?
So we have a kind of usual process for socialising policies. We often have lunch and learn briefing sessions for managers and staff to attend. We get invited to our Medway Makers Forum regularly, and we take give feedback around new policies there. They will have usually seen them in advance of them coming to Employment Matters Committee. That would be the usual procedure as well. Our HR business partners who are out at DMTs will again share with the management teams there what the new policies are, what the key takeaways are. We've got a new communication channel for service managers called Need to Know. So we will share, you know, we've got this new policy, you need to know about that. We also have a HR newsletter that we publish every month that goes out to all staff. So again, we always talk about changes that we make or updates and new policies in there.
And just one other thing we're trialling at the moment is a system called Matters Compliance, whereby we're looking to put our policies in there to ensure that we can track people who have read and understood the policy, particularly managers where they've got a key role to play in applying the policy. And that's going to go some way to help us with our upskilling of managers and holding managers to account for the roles we need them to do. So that's in its early stages at the moment. It's going through the accessibility policy. We don't know if that'll work yet because there's quite some commitment that's going behind it, but already early feedback suggests that is a way of us keeping a handle on who's having access to the policies, who's reviewing them, and who can assure themselves that they're very familiar with them. Wouldn't necessarily put all draft policies through there. Perhaps the managers who are in the 10%, absolutely, and make sure they're applying it. But when we get to a point when we're in the full consultation of 30 days with the trade union, for those policies that do matter, we will be pushing it through a system that will capture that interaction.
I have one more follow-up question, but I think you partially answered it already. So you have mentioned that this is about a mindset change for managers, and clearly you can go through that process of, yes, I've read it, and so on. What do you think would be required in order to ensure that mindset change is actually happening?
So I think one of the most powerful things that we've been doing and we will continue to do as we go along is hear from the managers who have gone through the 10%. So we've done 2 sessions with managers. One was to do the review as Nikki went through this evening with you, but the other was for the managers who have taken on this task of looking at this to give an honest view around what they faced, what the challenges were, what tips and hints they would give to others. As part of our ongoing campaign, we'll be doing short interview questions with those managers as well, so that they've got a point of reference, a point of go-to. That complements a number of other tools and procedures that we're going to have in place for people, but we're trying to do creative comms in a way of supporting people. I think the feedback loop in this is really, really key, and not just for people to give us their views, but for people to talk about their experience, and we're relying on the workforce to come together. This isn't a HR position to be in, and it's not just for HR to sell it, but it's actually the people who are living what we're going through, and using them in the right way. And we're already calling them ambassadors, if you like, without a formal word being appointed. We were suggesting, say, we've got a few key ambassadors who we've got off the line, and and they're willing to champion this because they're quite excited about the work that they've put in place, and they do want to coach and talk to others about it. So I think people who have been through it is going to have a greater voice than HR who are writing the policy.
Thank you, Sam. Do we have any other comments or questions that we want to make? Councillor Cook.
Thank you. Aware that we usually have a 2-year review on policies, I believe, and I really take what you said, that we're going to need to watch this, and you've explained lots about how you're going to do that. Are we as a committee going to see the impact of that before 2 years? Do we need to agree a timescale for that? Is it definitely going to be on the next agenda? What's your view? Thank you.
I mean, I take that from an assumption point. Nicola might correct me. I don't think we'll be in a position to come back to the next committee on what that review will be, only simply because from the information Nikki went through earlier, we've got a lot of teams starting in the 1st of July. Now, when we say starting, we've still got to go through those skills assessment, align them, and for them to understand the policy and socialise it with them. So I think when we've got a bigger cohort where we've had the opportunity to apply some applications, then we'll be in a position to share that early finding back with you. But at the moment, we've got existing legacy market premiums. We know where they are and what they look like, but it's going to be about our new approach under the new scheme. So the reality of that is going to be taking place beyond the 1st of July. To get the evidence base in, we meet every quarter. So I would say probably in about 6 months, we would have some early findings that we could share. I don't know if you want to.
Councillor Cook.
So I wonder if it's a question more for Democratic Services, but if we, I know we're asked to agree the policy. If we agree the policy, do we agree it for a 2-year period, or is there the possibility that we could agree this policy on an annual basis in the first instance? Is that an appropriate question?
Michael?
Yes, if you wanted to do that, that's open to the committee, yes.
Just for clarification, Councillor Cook, are you making that as a proposal?
I'd be interested to hear what the rest of the committee feel about that as a possibility.
Councillor Hapwell?
In the end, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if we want to bring it back and review it in the first instance of 12 months, then let's do that. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, but if you're frightened that we've lost touch with it in 2 years because it's such a new policy, then but we must be careful not to review every policy every 12 months, otherwise we'd be overworked.
Sam?
Perhaps a suggestion might be, so we've given you an update today on the first findings from the MedPay. As we embark on kind of phase 2 and we start to conclude the 10%, there might be a natural point within our timeline that we could suggest we come back, and as part of the update, we give you some early findings from some of the draft policies that we put in place. So rather than reviewing the whole policy, we give some early findings around what worked, what didn't work, and perhaps gave assurance through that mechanism.
Would the committee be in agreement to that? Yep. Okay, can you note that, please? Thank you. Keep forgetting the button. So, in terms of, do we have any other comments or questions? So we've been asked to agree the new policy. Are we in agreement? Agreed. So the policy is agreed. Thank you. And moving on to agenda item 8, changes to the MedPay salary scales. Over to you again, Sam, to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper seeks to change the pay structures that are currently under the MedPay. As you know, and you've heard this evening, that the review has been taking place since October 2022. Part of the initial scope of this review was not to consider changing any of the pay scales, but there's been several issues that have come to light that need attention in order for us to align this and achieve the original ambitions of the programme. Back in 2018, the children and adult social care teams moved away from the MedPay ranges and they introduced new social worker pay scales. There's an overlap with existing MedPay pay scales. To look at synergy across there in terms of us having one pay scale is going to be difficult if we don't create some movement within the current bands that we've got. Service managers currently are on quite a low starting salary within the pay range. This is low in comparison to the market that we have. And also we're finding that in some instances we're over promoting people into the service manager band when actually the skills within their profession desire a higher pay. There's no current mechanism, as we've mentioned before, around moving through those pay bands other than the performance award, which tends to be between 0.5 and 1%. And previous MedPay scales have overlapped at the top and the bottom of the bands. And as part of our April pay award, we did agree a creation of a gap between 2 and 4, but not between any other bands. So the first proposal is to look at the introduction of a range 8, which will sit between the range 7 and the service manager band. This is to improve the current pay scales, and the committee are being asked to consider incorporating this into the structure to help with some of the recruitment challenges we've got in the hard to fill areas and to avoid range 7s reporting to range 7s. It will create greater career progression and negate the need for 3 separate pay structures moving forward. It will also look to harmonise some of the other salaries. The introduction of this is a way to also align the social worker pay scales so that we can incorporate this into one pay scale. That's the first proposal. The second proposal is to introduce a £500 pay gap between the remaining bands of 5 to 7, which would be 5 to 8 now, if you agree the first proposal. And that is to allow there to be a clear distinction between somebody leaving one band and moving into the other band. This will also help us to move to 3 spot points within the band, which will be an entry level, a level which will be the middle of the band, as we've mentioned before, and then the top level. These levels are called A, B and C, and Nikki alluded to it within her update. This will ensure that there's pay progression within the band and we can make clear distinctions between that career progressional framework. The £500 gap will ensure that there is a clear lift between the pay bands and will allow some further movement in terms of people being promoted up. The committee is asked to consider this proposal in full, so that's the introduction of the range 8 pay band, to include the introduction of the spot points within the current pay bands and to continue the £500 pay gap for the remaining pay bands that exist, following on from the work we've done in April. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. And I open up to members for comment and questions. And Councillor Hackwell, you're first out of the...
Thank you for the report. I'm broadly supportive of this approach. I think that perhaps we do need a range 8, and maybe a few years down the line we might need a range 9. It's it's just moving with the times, I guess. I do think having distinct £500 between the ranges, people actually will feel they've achieved something as well. So I'm broadly supportive. I have a couple of comments though. I'm rather flabbergasted that of the 20 posts that we think would fall into range 8, only 17 are non-existent, either in people or organisational, which is a bit concerning that we haven't got people doing the job. So, we need to understand and look at that in detail. If that's a new statistic that has just come out, we need to understand why it's like that and what we can do. The service managers, yeah, again, I'm broadly, but I am a bit concerned of the £2 million at the end of it if everybody got to the midpoint. It's a lot of money to commit, and we haven't got a lot of money at this point in time.
Thank you, Councillor Hackwell. Sam or Nicola? Okay, both.
So I'm going to take the first point around the 17 posts. These are job profiles that were created at the start of MedPay, so back in 2014, and they have not been obsoleted when they've, jobs have changed and evolved. So it's an opportunity to kind of cleanse the roles that exist within our HR and payroll system.
Thank you, Chair. And the point around the 2 million costs, so this was the one that I explained before where we've made the assumption of everybody moving to midpoint. So this proposal doesn't cost £2 million. This will be, overall, we're expecting a £2 million cost if we were to put everybody at midpoint. Most definitely that is an assumption as opposed to fact at this time. There is further ongoing work, but one of the things we were very clear to do was be transparent about the overall cost. So that does pick up this particular element. It wouldn't have any further bearing on that 2 million. And it goes back to my previous point around what we need to do now to see if that is possible and how we will do it. We do have vacancies in the system, so the obsolete post, Nicola's absolutely right. The system as is, the hierarchies have never really been changed as the jobs have moved. So we have a transformation programme across my team in HR that are looking at making sure the establishment list is our one grain of truth, and we use our budget from that establishment list, because at the moment there's a lot of work where we duplicate across finance and HR because we're working off 2 different assumption bases. We are correcting that for this year, and that cleansing, this will help with that cleansing.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Filmer?
Yeah, quite happy to agree this. Now we've had the £2 million explained, you know, we're more happy. But there is a need for that upper band to overcome the problem, so happy to support.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments, questions? Okay, so we've been asked to recommend that full council approve the introduction of a range 8 pay band, and also the introduction of spot points and a £500 pay gap at the bottom of the pay ranges, as set out in section 3 and 4 of the report, and increase the bottom of the service manager pay range to £55,455. Are we in agreement? Great, fantastic. Thank you. So we're now moving on to agenda item 9, Organisational Change. I will ask Nicola to introduce the report. Nicola, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the Organisational Change report that's brought to this committee twice a year. It details new reorganisations of services and transfers under the 2P regulations. And for this report, it's the period the 1st of October 2022 to the 31st of March 2023. At section 3, there is a summary of the ongoing organisational review consultations. I'm not intending on reading all of those out, but at Appendix A, you've got a summary of the redundancy impact, and in this period, 2 staff were made redundant in this period and 2 were redeployed. At section 4, you've got a summary of the new organisational change proposals. The Council recognises that change can be unsettling time for everyone, and every effort is made to support staff. In addition to individual meetings staff can have with their managers, HR provides support for affected employees, and wherever possible we will help support the redeployment of individuals into new roles. We also have the Council's employee assistant provider, Care First, as well as we encourage staff to talk to their trade unions for support, and we also have a workplace chaplain available. So I'm asking this Appointment Matters Committee to note the present position and the support arrangements for staff.
Thank you, Nicola. So I open up to the committee members for comment or questions on this agenda item. Do we have any?
No,
No?
quite happy.
No? Okay, wow. Okay, so we'll move on to the recommendation. Members are asked to note the present position and the support arrangements for staff. Are we in agreement? Agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Okay, so we're moving on to agenda item 10, early retirement and redundancy payments. Nicola, can I ask you once again to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. So again, this is a regular report that's brought twice a year, and it covers the same period as the Organisational Change paper that I've just presented, so the 1st of October 2022 to the 31st of March 2023. Whilst there's no specific decision to be made based on the report, it is important that the committee is apprised of all decisions taken in relation to early retirements and severance payments. At 3.1, in terms of school-based staff, this report details that there were no school-based staff made redundant. And at 3.2, non-school-based staff, so council staff, there were two employees that were made redundant and or took early retirement at a total cost of £144,182.79. The committee is asked to note the report.
So before, thank you, Nicola, for introducing the report. I now want to ask members if anyone wants to discuss the exempt appendix. Do any? No? Okay. In which case? Do we have questions or comments on the public report? No? Okay. In which case, we have been asked as members to note the report. Are we happy to note the report? Agreed? Agreed. Thank you, Nicola. In which case, we have concluded the business of our committee meeting tonight, and I now close our meeting. Thank you, everybody.
On agenda item 5, we have agreed that Nikki Smith will share an initial summary of the MedPay project evaluation KPIs when they are able to be shared. The report was noted and unanimously agreed that that was noted. Likewise, for item 6, we agreed that the report would be noted. For agenda item 7, there was an action that early findings of the review process of the policy would again be shared with the meeting when they were available, and that report was agreed unanimously that we would note that. Item 8, the recommendation again was agreed that that would be recommended to full council. Likewise, we agreed the noting of the Organisational Change report. Can I just check that we need to then accept and second those recommendations?
Chairman, effectively that's already happened. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
So on the second occasion, I now close the meeting. Thank you, everybody.